a war about access to resources. It's a war about who controls the resources and who benefits from them. And I don't know how much time we have. I'm just going to mention a couple other things because I'm probably running on a little bit. It's particularly interesting for us to look at Colombia right now because we can learn some lessons from Mexico, right? We've experienced this drug war now for almost 10 years in Colombia. We've seen an escalated U.S. role there. And now we hear Barack Obama talking about the role the U.S. is going to play in Mexico, right, to solve the problem there. Mexico and Colombia aren't exactly the same, right? We tend to gloss over the differences when we talk about Latin America. No, countries have real differences in culture, differences in history, but there are some dynamics that are the same. Mexico also has a lot of internal conflict, right? In 2007, the uprising in Oaxaca, a lot of people probably heard about that. For a month, the country of Mexico has had no control over the state of Oaxaca, one of their biggest states, right? The people took control of that state. So popular uprisings in Latin America are a real thing that can happen. And the levels of violence, the murders we're seeing, and the role of the Mexican military, similarly, problematic human rights record, similarly sending people to the U.S. to be trained. A couple of other things that are similar context. In Colombia, one of the things that has more and more increased participation in coca production has been what's been happening with globalization. The farmers in Colombia cannot compete on the global market. The farmers in Mexico cannot compete on the global market either. Since NAFTA has gone into effect, in the first 10 years of NAFTA, 2 million Mexican farmers were driven out of business. They could not compete. Where do they go? They go to the cities looking for work. What kind of jobs are they going to find? Right? In Colombia, they're looking to grow. In Mexico, they're going to become part of the drug trade. That's just the reality of an economic crisis where there are not jobs, where people can't compete in their legitimate trades that they've grown up with. What are you going to participate in when you have a massive influx of people rural to urban? What are the jobs that are available for them? And I think what we can expect in a country that already has a wealth disparity similar to Colombia, where there's a massive population in the outlying areas who do not have access to meet their basic needs, well-organized social movement networks, we're going to see military aid going to Mexico be used to repress those social movements. We've already seen it happen. In October, there was an incident in Oaxaca where the military raided a community garden project, accusing them of growing drugs. There were no drugs found, there were no weapons found, but who pays for the damage, right? Casualty of the war on drugs. Politically motivated, doesn't matter. The reality, the consequences are still the same. The other thing that we're going to probably see, other than an increase in violence, if our aid to Mexico in their war on drugs is military aid, we're probably going to see an increased pressure on the border. Because we're going to see repression, we're going to see people fleeing that repression, and that's what we've seen in Colombia, 4 million internally displaced and an increase in people fleeing across the Ecuadorian and Venezuelan borders. There's no reason not to expect the exact same thing happening in Mexico. So we're setting ourselves up for not only an increase in violence in Mexico, but to increase the tensions that are already at a breaking point along our border with Mexico. And David, when he announced that he was hoping to have some people here who call their representatives, this is an issue, I think, that you can call your representative on. I don't know if our Curie is the main rep for people here locally, but the drug war and free trade issues are something that representatives need to hear from us on, because I think they assume that we don't care about foreign policy, right? People don't care about foreign policy. We have enough problems in our country and enough other things to deal with, and they can kind of do whatever they want. Well, the free trade agreements, NAFTA, needs to be dismantled, and the U.S. is pursuing a free trade agreement with Colombia. It's just going to exacerbate these problems where farmers don't have options and turn to either growing coca or moving to the cities where they get involved in the drug trade. The other piece that they need to hear from us is no military aid for these, especially for these countries with massive human rights abuses. The message is, if the funding keeps coming, that all those violations are okay. And there's no reason why our country should be providing any kind of military aid to countries who have huge, long histories of human rights abuses. So I'll just leave it at that and take any questions after.
Thank you.
Hi, Jessica. I was wondering, do you have any information about the problems with the military where they are trafficking drugs back into areas or seizing drugs and then distributing them here in our own country?
That's a great question. There's a lot of rumors and not a lot of hard information, but it's certainly something that everybody talks about. The other piece that's a dynamic in both Colombia and Mexico is you see, particularly I just read an article about this in Mexico, a huge number of people who they arrest in the drug trade are ex-soldiers. They're ex-military, right? I mean, when you get out of the military, what are the jobs available? What are you trained for? They overlap really nicely with the kinds of things that you need to do as somebody participating in the drug trade. And so there's a revolving door, basically, back and forth, and which is another reason why that's the wrong direction to go. I mean, we're basically paying and arming the people who are then going to enter the drug trade and continue on the other side. There's no reason to think that that's going to be a solution.
And another question, you said they were spraying a herbicide all over the countryside. Is that made by the same people that make Roundup, Monsanto?
Yes, although there's some other chemicals involved, and actually the British company who is providing one of the additives has pulled out of doing that because of the backlash against it. But yeah.
I have a question, Jessica. What is some of the risk to the human health situation? I mean, you talked about some of the environmental impact, but I mean, I assume if someone's living in the area that's being sprayed, that might have some adverse health consequences.
Yeah, and I actually have some photos of one of the things that we saw most commonly was among the children, rashes and blisters. And you know, this is something that's particularly frustrating. I've met with the U.S. Embassy in Colombia 3 times and raised this issue every single time because it's a serious issue, and it's hard to look people in the face who say, come look at my child and tell me what I can do about this rash. Right? That's a hard thing to do, and then to go back to the U.S. Embassy and raise the question, and they say, well, there's no evidence. Well, of course there's no evidence, because who's going to do the study, right? Nobody's giving money for somebody to go out and interview these people and document the health effects, and then you know, categorize them and establish what the causal relationship is. So there's no evidence, and so it gets ignored. But the anecdotal evidence and the experience of being there is that there's been a massive, I mean, well, 2 things: health impact on the people, and the environment, and also, you know, when you're doing aerial fumigations, it's not pinpoint precision, right? And a lot of other things get taken out, and we visited a school whose organic garden was fumigated, right? You know, the other thing is, we're not talking about large plantations of coca. These are small farmers, right? And the coca is integrated with the coffee plants and the yucca plants and the banana plants, and if it gets fumigated, everything gets fumigated. And there go your crops for the season, right? Because coca can be replanted, right? Here's the irony. What's going to get replanted? Coca has a short growing season. You can get multiple crops in a season. You're not going to do that for a banana tree, right? If the banana tree's dead, it's gone for a few years. Well, what are you going to replant coming out of that? You're going to replant the coca because it's the quickest cash crop for you to regrow.
What agency is at the forefront in making a change over there in Colombia?
Well, there's several groups, and Colombia itself also has a well-organized infrastructure of social movement groups. In the U.S., Witness for Peace has done a lot of work in sending delegations, lobbying for changes in U.S. policy. Peace Brigades International has spent a lot of time in the communities accompanying people through situations of violence. Latin American Working Group here. There's really several groups who are trying to address this issue.
How do you think decriminalization would affect the people in Colombia?
It's people who address this issue in terms of U.S. foreign policy always say, you know, there's the economic factors, but the main driving force, why are people able to make a living off of growing coca? It's because of the demand in the U.S. And we heard that from people over and over again. You don't want cocaine in your country? Stop buying it. And people said it over and over. Why are you coming here? To fumigate the plants. We're not fumigating your tobacco plants in Virginia, and there's a hell of a lot of people dying from smoking, right? But imagine the response we would have here if some other country came in and fumigated, like North Carolina. It would be outrageous. And that's how people are experiencing it there. And they're saying, why are you so mad at us? You obviously want it, you know, like, stop buying it. And they're actually, and it's not, this is something we've known for a long time, that this is the most effective solution. The RAND Corporation did a study in '99, 23 times more effective for us to provide treatment here than to do intervention in
Right.
other countries. 10 times more effective for us to do it here than at the border. We know it. It makes sense. We know it. There's obviously something else going on politically. If we were just going based on logic, we'd be doing it already.